Hello, everyone, and welcome to another New England Historical Association fall meeting. My name is Martin Menke, and I have the great privilege of chairing this year's Book Prize Committee. My colleagues on the committee were Kristen Peterson, Marie McDaniel, and Ian Delahanty, three intrepid colleagues who together read many, many volumes of very high quality. Among those, we eventually chose Mark Peterson's The City-State of Boston, The Rise and Fall of an Atlantic Power, 1630 to 1865, published last year by the Princeton University Press. My colleagues thought that this was an amazing work by Professor Peterson, the Edmund S. Morgan Professor of History at Yale University. Comments included ideas such as this. The word that comes to mind for this book is magisterial. Peterson delivers a 3 centuries long history of Boston that has fundamentally challenged the way I conceive of and teach about not only New England's colonial history, but also the history of the Atlantic world more generally. Another colleague found that I found Peterson's approach to urban history and to Boston to be unique and compelling. As an historian who has read as many books on Boston's history as have popped off the presses, this is the finest in my humble opinion. As you know, we historians are very good at being critical and often stinting with praise. So the words that you just read about Dr. Peterson's work are really amazing. It is an excellent work that everybody, no matter what subfield of history, could benefit from reading. Thank you very much.
Greetings. My name is Mark Peterson, and I appreciate this opportunity to express my thanks to the New England Historical Association for awarding my book, The City-State of Boston, the James P. Hanlan Book Award for this year. I'm very grateful for the honor and for the opportunity to be able to say a few words about City-State of Boston. It's a book that I wrote in order to accomplish 2 things. The first of them was to offer a fresh take on the important city of Boston, and especially considering its long history from its founding in 1630 through the era of the American Civil War. It's not so much an internal history of Boston, focused on what happens in the streets and the wharves, the internal politics of the city or its religious life. Those are important topics, but they're subjects that other authors have written about beautifully in the past, and I didn't want to reduplicate their efforts. Rather, it's more of a history of Boston as an actor in the wider world of the early modern Atlantic, focusing on the ways in which the city expanded and presented itself through its connections to far-flung places, including the Caribbean, which was a source of its economy, including all kinds of places in continental Europe. So there's material on Boston's relationships with Germany and France, its international world of trade, its cultural connections through a wider world as well. And so on that score, there were simply lots of topics in Boston's history that I felt deserved attention, and the book was designed to promote that. But the second thing that I was trying to do with this book was to get Boston's history out from under the shadow of United States history. And this is a problem that historians of colonial America in general face, a widespread sense that the significance of the colonial experience is mainly as a precursor to and an explanation for the coming of the United States, the big story, as it were, that comes after. And so I wanted to be able to explore Boston's history without that being the necessary target or telos of the work that I was doing. Let me give you an example of the kind of thing I mean. Perhaps the most common metaphor or symbol for understanding early Boston comes in the phrase city upon a hill. US presidents from Jack Kennedy to Ronald Reagan used that phrase, which indeed John Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts, used in passing in a particular text that he wrote. But they used that phrase to imagine that somehow Winthrop and the other founders of Boston were envisioning the future of the United States as a great, powerful nation. Which of course is absurd. Winthrop could not possibly have been imagining any such thing. It's utterly anachronistic and ahistorical. So what was John Winthrop thinking of, and the other founders of Massachusetts, in terms of the kind of polity they wanted to create? Well, I was inspired to use the idea of Boston as a city-state, in part by a work that a colleague of mine many years ago, and I taught at the University of Iowa, wrote, Dwight Bozeman's book, To Live Ancient Lives, which was a history of the Puritan movement, and as its title suggested, deeply grounded in the notion that English Puritans in the 16th and 17th century were deeply invested in the Bible as a source, as a guide to the kind of religious lives that they thought they should live. And he was absolutely right, but it was not only in religious terms that the founders of New England looked to the past. That is, the most important form of polity of the ancient world was the city-state. And of course, in 1630, no one could imagine the coming of the modern nation state, certainly not in anything like the United States was. But they were very much committed to the idea that the project they were engaging in was essentially the transition or translation of a compact, self-governing, economically autonomous polity from the old world to the new. And in fact, I discovered all kinds of evidence to that effect in the early writings of the founders of Boston and New England. And so the longer I worked on this book, the clearer it became to me that city-state was more than just a metaphor, but that it was a good way of thinking about the kind of polity Bostonians wanted to create. And so the book became my effort to try to trace, for as long as it made sense to trace it, the growth, the development, and the fate of the city-state that Bostonians built around them, not only in Massachusetts, but in other colonies that grew out of the Massachusetts Bay Hearth, like Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, and to understand the history of this place as a powerful city with important connections to the wider world, connected to a hinterland that was essential to its economic, its cultural, and its social life. So the book takes this story from, or even really before, New England's founding through the era of the American Civil War. It does deal with the coming of the United States in the 1770s and 80s, but it sees that as kind of a tangent to Boston's history, or another set of forces coming across the world that Boston and New England created, and not necessarily happily. In fact, the book ends with what I consider to be the end of the city-state of Boston, not by some great defeat of the city proper, but rather by its ultimate absorption in the projects of the United States as a nation-state. And so that's the story that I'm trying to tell here. And I again am extremely grateful to the New England Historical Association for honoring this book, and I hope the award will encourage many other people to read it. So once again, thank you very much for this important honor. My gratitude to the association.